Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark. And in this episode, I'm joined by co-host Christopher Ray Patton. All right, kids, we're hitting side 2 of Van Halen 1. As I said, first episode of this album review, that's how I'm referring to it. Although I don't know that the band ever actually referred to it as that. But be that as it may, we're talking about Van Halen's debut album here today for side 2. Lots of stuff to get into here for side 2. I thought side 1 came out very cool. Not just our review, but the album itself, because it's a classic album, as we said in part 1. And if you're a rock guy or a rock girl, or and it's something that you're into, then of course you're going to dig it. I mean, everybody's got their own taste, kids. We've pointed out here on the 6M multiple times in the past. Everything's subjective. Movies, music, television, you name it, it's all subjective. You can have your favorites. Maybe you hate Van Halen. Maybe you're just listening to this because you enjoy the podcast. Hey, thanks. We appreciate you. But maybe you're listening because you truly do dig the band and you love everything about them. Hopefully, somewhere in the middle, everyone can find a little bit of something that they can get into and they can enjoy. And that's what we're going to try to give to you here today as we review side 2 of Van Halen's debut album. But before we do that, let's do this. Van Halen is the debut studio album by American rock band Van Halen, released on February 10th, 1978 by Warner Brothers Records. Widely regarded as one of the greatest debut albums in rock music and considered a forerunner perhaps, or a big hit of glam metal, the album was a major commercial success and peaking at number 19 on the Billboard Top LPs and Tape chart. Don't think I've ever heard the words top LPs and tape chart in my life. That's awesome. It has sold more than 10 million copies in the United States and receiving a diamond certification from the Recording Industry Association of America and making it one of the best-selling albums in the country. As we said, released in 1978, the complete running time is only 35 minutes, 34 seconds. Of course, Warner Brothers is the label. Lots to talk about. But that, in essence, is your lowdown on Van Halen. All right, kids, so there we go. Chris, after the lowdown just now and everything we've been talking about, you and I start talking off mic here today. What's your thoughts on side 1? If this were the old days when you're flipping over vinyl, what are your thoughts on side 1? Like, do you prefer side 1 over side 2? What's your take?
Oh, it's tough, but yeah, I definitely prefer side 1 over side 2. Not that I feel like you could. This album is one that I listen to all the way through without skipping, like we talked about when talking about side 1. But yeah, side 1's got the balls, I guess. It's where the harder, more energetic stuff tends to lie, is on side 1.
Right. Yeah, well, there's good stuff on side 2. Some unexpected things. There's only a couple of things. Maybe 3 tracks on side 2 that I would immediately recognize, and perhaps folks who were only familiar with the band would recognize, and maybe the other 3 tracks, maybe they wouldn't know all that well. I don't know, but we'll get into that here. Well, let's kick this off, man. Side 2 begins with Jamie's Crying. This is 3 minutes and 31 seconds for this track, and man, there's some backstory to this one, I'll tell you. And I can't wait to get your take on this. For anyone that knows this song, you know what it sounds like. You know it sounds awesome. The guitar riff in it is great. The tom-toms sound amazing. I mean, the band is just on point here, Chris. But also, I was going to call this the Bones of Wild Thing by Tone Loc. It's not the Bones. It's the freaking song. I mean, he just, we both like hip-hop. I'm not throwing shade, but it's the freaking song, man. Do you reconcile that as a fan of both genres? Do you know what I mean? Do you have any disdain toward anybody through this little deal here? I mean, what's your thoughts on how all this worked out?
I mean, for Van Halen in 1989, when Tone Loc put that out, it probably just exposed more people to Van Halen, honestly. Similar to, Aerosmith and Run DMC. Like sampling happens so much now that it's kind of crazy. But when you're talking about hip hop in the late '80s, you're still that market was still growing. So in a lot of cases, it might have been the first time someone heard Van Halen, or they may have never realized it was a sample at all. So it's one of those weird things. I know that Eddie didn't like it at first, and then like came around later in years and had talked about how he appreciated it introducing his band to a whole new audience. So if Eddie Van Halen was okay with it, I guess I have to be okay with it as well. That being said, man, I've never been a huge fan of Wild Thing.
Why is that? You think the lyrics don't fit? Is it his delivery? What is it that you don't like about it?
I mean, it doesn't really. It's just I'm not a big Tone Loc fan in general. Like Funky Comedina and Wild Thing, I think are interchangeable as songs. They almost sound exactly the same. And it's that like the late '80s rap for me is not really outside of like the Beastie Boys is not something I get down on. It's like you kind of have, for lack of a better term, to me, a lot of corny lyrics. You hadn't gotten the edge that you get when some of the '90s East Coast and West Coast hip hop starts to come around.
Yeah, that's fair. And by the way, Funky Cold Medina samples Kiss, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't it?
Oh God, maybe.
I think so.
I'm gonna look this up now.
I know it, but for some reason it's escaping me at the moment. I'm pretty sure it's a Kiss song. It samples.
Christine 16.
That's
by Kiss and Hot Blooded by Foreigner.
Wow.
And Honky Tonk Women by the Rolling Stones. So it has lots of samples in it.
Well, look, kids. Again, we're not throwing shade. Some of the most legendary hip hop artists of all time have sampled. It is what it is. Once you get over the initial, hey, that's not that song I like. That's a different song. What's going on here? By the way, I've always heard the story that Alex, that the band didn't know, they weren't notified, and that Alex heard it on a radio station and recognized his fill and said, wait a minute. Dude, heck of a way to find out, man.
Yeah, and it's one of those things because, I mean, at some point it's almost free use because you're sampling 10 to 15 seconds and then putting something completely different over top of it. So I don't think that there was any adjudication or anything that came from that. Have you watched the Beastie Boys documentary?
Is it the Apple doc?
Yes.
That's a great doc, dude. I haven't seen it in a while, but it's fantastic.
So he talks about the early days of sampling and the crazy way that he had, was it Led Zeppelin 4 stretched out across all these multiple chairs and stuff, sampling When the Levee Breaks.
Yeah.
I just imagine that kind of led into a lot of sampling. I'm trying to think if there was, what other samples had happened before that, I guess.
Well, I mean, dude, it's back to James Brown. And without James Brown, there's no rap, I don't think. Not as we know it today, because James Brown's been taken from, along with any number of other R&B and soul artists through the years. And then the rock guys started getting hit, of course, with Run DMC, as we know. And, I don't know. I've got mixed feelings on a lot of that stuff. Cause I in my younger days when I wasn't crazy about hip hop, because I wasn't in my teenage years, not too much, but slowly but surely I started kind of coming over to that. There were artists that I like. And then when DMX hit, it was like, forget about it. That's, man, and then Jay, of course, and then other artists that come along, and I'm like, all right, I'm dialed in. I enjoy this stuff. But for some years there, man, I was like, yeah, I'm not happy with this. And I would use the word stealing because I was uneducated and didn't understand what was really going on behind the scenes. But, Chris, I would imagine for a lot of people, that's what they call it. Oh, you're just stealing that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. What do you think that does for rap? By the way, it doesn't have to be a massive answer here. It's just your opinion, because this could probably take all day. But what's your opinion on rap as a genre? Do you think that they sort of always fight against that? Do you think it matters anymore or no?
In the '80s, you were way more limited with the equipment that you had to make beats.
Mm,
You know what I mean? So like
yeah.
taking a sample in some ways makes a lot of sense. I was kind of curious to see if Rick Rubin worked on that Tone Loc album, which he didn't. But like I know the Beastie Boys, When the Levee Breaks sample that they use, and then Run DMC sampling Aerosmith, that he was like the recording engineer and producer of both of those. So I don't like, to me that's kind of where it started, and then you get into the 90s and pretty much everyone's using a sample from like, from something.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of gives you a structure to build off of. I mean, we're talking about originally, like the way hip hop started was from DJs partying, right? Like party DJs and club DJs and stuff. So it makes sense that you would get loops, because it's essentially what they're doing is looping a certain section of an album and then rapping over top of it. And that's kind of, at least of my knowledge, how hip hop started, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's in the DNA of what hip hop is to use samples. So I don't think that they have a, I don't know. If I was a hip hop artist, I wouldn't be upset if someone's like, "Oh, well, you just take stuff from other people." And I was like, "Yeah, but I turned it into something completely different."
Sure.
Was that Buddy Rich famous quote? A great musician is something to the effect of a great musician is just a thief that doesn't get caught stealing.
Well, there's nothing original. I mean, for me to use the word original when it comes to music, you'd have to go back to we're talking about the first beginnings. And even then, Chris, you can't really say such and such was the first person to ever do such and such. No, he wasn't. No, she wasn't. They took it from something.
I mean, there's obviously examples where something is exactly like Danny California and Last Dance with Mary Jane. Those you can copy and paste those on top of each other. I think that's a little more absurd than I sampled 10 seconds of a song and then wrote a rap
Sure.
track around the entire thing, because they're two completely different genres.
Yeah. What was the one that is one of the ones that Jay did with Kanye West before Kanye, lost his mind? And God, I can't remember what it was, but the sample, you're like, that thing, you can't make a song out of that sample. But then it turned out really good. And I can't remember.
Is it Diamonds Are Forever?
No, oh, dude, I love Diamonds Is Forever. You kidding me? I love that song.
I would
don't
never
remember.
think of sampling a James Bond song, but they made it work.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, man, Kanye was fun until he wasn't fun anymore. So
I mean, I have said this multiple times, but Graduation is still like one of the greatest rap albums of all time.
yeah, can't argue with that.
It's easy to look back at it now with Kanye, crazy Kanye, but if you put it in a vacuum and just listen to it and don't know anything about Kanye, you'd be like, this is a great album.
Right. Dude, the Dust Brothers are listed as producers on Tone Loc's first album. How you like that?
Yeah, I was looking because I was like,
Wow.
was Rick Rubin involved in this in any way? That was my first thought of like when we started talking about it. But yeah, Jamie's crying though, to get back
Yes.
away from hip hop. I think the biggest thing about this song is the kind of the crossover appeal. This is I think the biggest radio hit off the album, where you could see it both playing on a pop station and your rock station. And it is the one album to me that stands out like that. I think like looking at some of the critics at that time, basically talking about it had danceable rhythm and a catchy hook, which I think sums this song up perfectly. Which is why it's so easy to be sampled, right? Like that it has that crossover appeal. So I know that they played this song was definitely in their live shows until like the 90s as one of their key tracks. So probably this is the biggest song off side B for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. It's like that line, the way you said it, was like, it's got a great beat and I can dance to it. Yeah, it's yeah. It does. Yeah, it's a high. I mean, I think it's a highlight of the album. It's definitely a highlight of side 2, best part of side 2, I think. That and track 8, I think, but we'll get there. Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's a good little rock song. I think the band sounds good. The band sounds good on every track here. And let's see, this song was released, one of 5 songs included on a sampler EP that Warner Brothers Records put out in advance of the release of the album, along with Running with the Devil, You Really Got Me, Eruption, and Ice Cream Man. Not a bad little EP there, Chris. That's not bad at all.
No, and it's So this song is also interesting because it's kind of telling the story from the woman's point of view. David Lee Roth lyrics, because I mean the entire story lyrically of the song is Jamie is she regrets having a one night stand essentially, and it's just talking about her internal conflict of looking for actual love, and that's the
Mhm.
entire. So it's like it's like there's juxtaposition between this like happy upbeat music behind it, and the lyrics are kind of sad when you think about them.
Yeah. Who would have thought Van Halen would have been deep? Well, you get later again. That's we don't like to. Well, I'm fine with it, but you don't like to talk about that other dude that replaced him. But
Yeah, you know, I went a little hard. I went a little too hard on old Sammy Hagar, so I will try to refrain from banging on him as much on this side two we're doing here.
Sam be like, "Peace and love, brother. Come on now." That's
He
Sammy.
probably would. He'd probably send me like a bottle of Cabo Wabo with an apology note. Sorry I upset you so much or something. He seems like a nice guy. He just also seems like rock and roll's Jimmy Buffett, like I said. So
Another little note here. I found this interesting. The producer, as we said, Ted Templeman, said, "quote At first, I was worried that the lyrics were too reminiscent of a '50s white pop breakup song, but eventually I realized Dave's lyric was a lot like those wonderful Holland Dozier Holland Motown tracks, like Where Did Our Love Go? Those songs sounded sappy, but were about heart-rending breakups. The way it came off was in keeping with that heavy metal, with a smile, upbeat sound. This teenage thing ended up being one of the best singles off the record." So there you go.
yeah, I mean, I could you could definitely you can tell that there's a lot of that in their music though, and the kind of especially when you look at some of the covers that they've done, like
Mhm.
the connection to Motown and I almost 50s doo wop. I mean, we got doo wop in the last track that we talked about before this with "I'm the One," right? Some
That's right.
little what do you call those group acapella moment in that song? So
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
definitely some influence there with DLR. I can see that.
yeah, for sure. Well, this one, I knew this one was going to take a little bit longer because of the sampling, because I really wanted to talk about it. But I think it's a solid track. I think it's one of their better tracks. I think I like it quite a bit. So we get quite a, I can't say a massive change. We get a little bit faster pace here with track number 7, Atomic Punk. And I'm going to hit you with something, and you may not hear this. Maybe you do, or maybe I've lost my mind. This track just reminds me of old school Iron Maiden. Am I crazy to think that? That's what I get every time I hear this song.
I think the guitar riff is kind of reminiscent of definitely something you would get. You get a lot of like scraping, pick scraping,
Mhm. Mhm.
and a lot of palm muting across all strings. Um, Definitely very very heavy distortion. So I could see that. You know, the only difference is Iron Maiden has what 3 guitar players.
Yeah, it's fair.
So, but yeah, like the as far as like some like a rhythm guitar track for what this album has for that, the just the riff, the main riff, I could definitely see that.
I can't say I'm the biggest Van Halen fan of all time. I'm definitely not a hater or a critic or anything. They're just not really a band that I go to routinely. So maybe I'm underestimating this tune. How is this tune? Is this tune held in high regard for this band overall? Because I really don't have the answer for that.
I mean, I think so because it kind of lays a groundwork between rock and roll and hard, like your 80s hard rock and metal, right? Because you're talking about a time when punk was kind of punk and disco, as we talked about on side one, were at the top of the charts. This is kind of a good in between.
Mhm.
Um, and it's also like a really high energy live song. So when you see them play it live, I think it, kind of has, it's probably more memorable if you're a huge Van Halen fan.
Mm.
I know that a lot of guitar players have talked about wanting to explore different texturing after hearing this song and different techniques just because of the guitar work on it alone.
Mhm. By the way, as I listen to it again, when I hear Mr. Brownstone, I'm getting some Atomic Punk vibes for sure. I don't know if I ever connected that till just now.
Yeah, and that goes back to kind of what I was saying is they're both those bands that probably more closely sound like each other than anything else. If you
Yeah.
really think about it, because they kind of come in weird times. Both of those bands come in weird times. But yeah, I could hear that. Yeah, yeah, Mr. Brownstone and Atomic Funk. I could see the correlation there for sure.
I can definitely hear it. Can't say I've heard it before, but something about going back to an album with fresh ears and hearing something you didn't hear before.
Boink Studios is the home of Tom Clark's main event, Tom Clark's 6M podcast, and Two Nations Under Ted, a Ted Lasso podcast. Visit the site today for links to every podcast platform, social media, special announcements, and a lot more. Check out the site and bookmark today, boinkstudios.com.
By the way, when are we going to get a Van Halen biopic? Everyone else is getting one. You're getting one. We're all getting one. When are they going to get one, I wonder?
The Chris Patton biopic. I'm getting
Chris
one.
I'm just saying remember when it was like the fashionable thing? Like it still happens, but like that Beatles, that one that they're working on this year, I've got fingers crossed. I don't know how it's going to come out, man. Fingers crossed. But I don't know. I'd kind of be afraid the Van Halen one would look more like a TV movie than anything else. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I really like the one that they did for Motley Crue on Netflix.
Yeah, it's not bad.
So if they do, but of course the Motley Crue story is just kind of absurd. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know how much Van Halen wants to lean into that image. I mean, if you're making it just about David Lee Roth, maybe you actually have a better movie, I guess.
Yeah. Because there's so much drama there, dude. It's not just, as most successful bands are not very boring. There's a lot of stuff and history and drama involved. But yeah.
Eddie and Alex don't really do the whole kiss and tell, for lack of a better term. Like, you don't
Yeah.
have a lot of interviews of them doing shoot interviews about like how crazy they were during this time period. Whereas like, like your Poisons and Motley Crues of the world kind of lean more into that rock and roll image.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Van Halen was rock and roll. They didn't have to like do anything else really. So if you're going to do it, you almost have to tell it from the one person in that band that more closely relates to those guys to make an interesting movie, which would be David Lee Roth, I would think.
Yeah, that's fair. So track number 8, I mentioned earlier, Feel Your Love Tonight. By the way, I didn't bother giving the runtimes here. Jamie's Crying is 3 minutes, 29 seconds. Atomic Punk is 2:59. In and out, we're done. And then Feel Your Love Tonight is at 3 minutes, 40 seconds by my count here, is one of the longest tracks on the album, which isn't saying much. There again, Chris, we're getting sort of the best of the band here. We got the background vocals. I mean, it's a really good tune, dude. Like, I don't know if it's one of my favorites, but I love the breakdown when they get to the chorus and stuff. I mean, I really like this track. What do you think about it?
I mean, so the way the vocals are recorded is amazing because they're doubling. I kind of talked about this earlier, but they double David Lee Roth's vocals and they sound real thick. But then they have both Eddie and Michael doing backing vocals, and you get like the vocal harmony section of that, which I think it just like adds so much to how big the vocals sound. This is also, I think this song is just verse, chorus, if I'm not mistaken. So it's pretty, you don't really have to think about it too much. This is another one that's kind of fit for radio. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, this is just a fun party type song. Not my favorite song on the album, but it's a good tune. I mean, like when you look at the entire track list on here, you have 6 songs that we've talked about already that are on their greatest hits album. And this is their debut. So that in itself is kind of nuts.
Isn't that crazy? I remember one of the first times, maybe the first time I started hearing about a rift between Sammy and the guys was that greatest hits. Did they do a volume 2, by the way?
Oh man, you're talking about the one that they released that was like the two disc.
Yeah, they released it when Sammy was still originally with them. And it's got the black cover with the gold logo in the center. It was like Greatest Hits Volume 1. And it was like maybe the first time that publicly Sammy came out and said something negative. He's like, he was wanting to go back in the studio. He's like, why don't we just do an album? Why are we doing Greatest Hits? And they were fighting him publicly about it. And I'm like, all right, this is weird. What's going on with you guys, man? Like, dude, it's like I told you in part 1, man. Sammy just wanted to play. Like, and anything that got in the way of that, I kind of felt like he's like, well, I'll just go home. I don't need this. Like, I just want to make music, man. What are we doing here? So I don't know.
I mean, he's probably just really upset because I'm looking at this track list. The first 9 songs of the album don't include him, and then
Oh wow, yeah. See, I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
And to be fair, it's Eruption, Ain't Talking About Love, which is probably why I thought those went back to back in my head when we were talking about that previously, because I think that actually is fitting. Then Running with the Devil, Dance the Night Away, In the Cradle Will Rock, Unchained, Jump, Panama, and then you get your first Sammy Hagar track of Why Can't This Be Love?
Yeah.
So, and then the rest of it is very Sammy heavy.
Yeah.
And when you compare it, I'm sure that it got criticism of like, you guys really only needed 9 songs for this greatest hits up. When you get into Pound Cake and Right Now at track 12 and 13. Well, I said I wasn't gonna bang on him too much. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd probably be upset too if like I'm the current lead singer of the band. You release the greatest hits, and like 10 of the songs are 10 out of 17 songs were from your from DLR.
Yeah, and it's that notion of, well, it's a cash grab. That's what that always felt like to me. Well, we're just going to make some money off this. And I'm like, yeah, but go create new stuff. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, the other thing is like, really, they left some track, like Jamie's Crying's not on here. Like I said, when you get into that 2000s release that they did, I think it was like 2008, 2009, that greatest hits version that they released.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it pretty much almost has the entirety of Van Halen on it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's probably even more mad about that, honestly, because they left some songs out of here from the debut album on this that I definitely would have included over things like Human Beings and Can't Stop Loving You, which are both off those Balance, that 1995 album.
So that Humans Being was the one they did for Twister. You don't like that one at all?
No.
Oh, I like that song. I don't know why. I've always liked that song. It doesn't feel like them at all. It doesn't feel like a Van Halen song, but I just like the music. I like the sound of it.
This is why I can't say that I'm like even as much as I love the first 3 albums. That's why I don't consider myself a diehard Van Halen fan, because I don't like anything after the first 3 albums.
Right. Well, no 1984 review for you, pal. I don't know what to tell you. So,
okay. Well, that's what you got. Van Halen 2, then 1984, right?
Now you got Van Halen 2, Women and Children First, Fair Warning.
First. So the first 4 albums.
Yeah, Fair Warning, and then Diver Down, and then 84.
Okay, so maybe, yeah, I'm not huge on Diver Down. So 4 albums.
Yeah,
we'll go with 4. Really, 3 albums. We'll say that most of that stuff is good. The majority, if you're doing like it'd be like a B+.
Right.
if you're doing those 5 that you just named.
Looks like they did 4 albums with Sammy. This one that came out in 2012 called A Different Kind of Truth. I'm not sure what that is, who that is. Do we know who's on that?
2020.
Is that Sammy or is that Dave back in 2012?
2012. No.
Tattoo is the first track on there.
I have no idea. I don't think I've heard anything off of it.
That's Dave on the first track. So maybe that's the one they made with him.
Now I want to look and see if they did a music video for that.
Yeah, Dave's on. I guess Dave's on the lead on every song.
Oh, A Different Kind of Truth.
Yeah.
Peaked at 67 in the U.S. charts.
Probably much better than Van Halen 3, which had Gary Sharon on lead vocal, that came out in 98.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that was a thing. Yeah,
well,
that's a no.
Here's what I'll say about Gary. I hope Gary got paid well for his time, because it sure felt like they didn't really give him a lot of opportunity to do anything. So,
oh man.
I mean, dude, if you were hired to come in to sing lead for Van Halen, and how do you say no? Number one, but number two, what kind of assurances would you need from the brothers that, look, I respect what you guys have done. What can I do to, in other words, let me play in the sandbox with you. But I don't know. Kind of seemed like Eddie and Alex made it clear it's our sandbox.
Yeah, I would almost be like, well, do we have to do an album think people
Right.
wouldn't care as much if I'm just doing the vocals.
Sure.
Like, if we're just gonna go play the stuff you've already done.
Yeah, let's just go on tour.
Yeah. So if I got hired just to go on tour with them, then yeah, sure.
Do a single. Do the single that they did. The single was fine. It wasn't classic or anything. I don't care. Do the single and then just go on tour. Well, as soon as we get that Wayback Machine finished, Chris, we'll go back and try to fix all this.
I don't know that I'll start with Van Halen. They had a pretty good run.
Of all the things you could correct in history,
yeah,
maybe the Van Halen with Gary Sharon wouldn't be in the top 10.
Yeah, I think that they still had a good run.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, I think Feel Your Love Tonight checks all the boxes. And it's, I think when these guys are at their best all the way through the 84 album, it's just happy. It's happy metal. Now that I read that quote, I can't quit thinking about this, smiling metal idea. Like it's just, it's party metal, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that's the word.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the word.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely something that, if you were more into like Iron Maiden or Black Sabbath and you got in your girlfriend's car and she was playing this, you wouldn't hate it.
That's actually a great point because Van Halen at this time is not crazy offensive. And you could play this stuff with your girlfriend in your, 1980 Trans Am and like with her big hair and her leg warmers. And she'd be okay with it versus you playing Sabbath. Be like, turn that's too loud or whatever. She'd be okay with this.
Yeah. That's the crossover, right? Like it's the kind of music that Van Halen was putting out. I think, and this is the same thing. Like, when you get into like Guns N' Roses, I feel like you play that. You're pretty safe putting that on in most situations.
Yeah.
Versus like, all right, we're going to listen to Cowboys from Hell.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, look, the next song, again, don't know how the fans, when I say the fans, I'm talking about the Van Halen fans, the faithful, right? Don't know where they hold this. I kind of believe that Little Dreamer at 3 minutes, 21 seconds, by the way, I kind of feel like this song's a little bit underrated, perhaps. Like there's always something about this I like. I like the groove of it. I like it, how it's steady. Like it's not frantic as the other tracks are. And it's not like happy, snap your fingers. It's somewhere like a low key tune. I actually like the way this sounds, man. I really like this track a lot. What do you think about this one?
This is kind of where the album starts to wind down. You got your rise, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Ain't Talking About Love. And then you get I'm the One. That's all rise. And then it kind of settles with Jamie's Crying. Then Atomic Punk brings it back up. And then Feel Your Love Tonight kind of simmers it back down. You get Little Dreamer. That simmers it back down even more. And then Ice Cream Man. So like, I think on the album itself, it makes sense. I like Little Dreamer. I think it's a fine song. There's nothing on this album I don't like, I guess is the best way to put it. Not my favorite song on the album. It's more bluesier than the rest of the album, outside of the next song. So this is kind of like their little shout out to the blues with Little Dreamer and Ice Cream Man. I don't know. It's very mid-tempo. Yeah. I guess lots of atmospheric sound on guitar. So he's not doing as much as he does on a lot of the other songs, as far as guitar work. So this is not going to be like the crazy. You're like, you don't put this on when you're trying to explain Van Halen to somebody like Eddie to somebody. This isn't the one.
Right.
I don't know. It's more melancholy than a lot of the other songs.
Good point.
Like if you're talking about like we were talking about this being kind of like a party, like almost like some of these tracks are like party songs. This one's not, so it's kind of different.
And as far as blues references go, and again, I'm not at this moment in time thinking about every album they ever did, but I don't know if I've seen a lot of heavy. You might think I'm crazy. Maybe you're going to mention a song. It's going, oh, you're right. Like heavy blues, influences here. I mean, if there are, you just hear them kind of sporadically. Am I on base on that? Do you, as a musician, do you have a different take on that?
I mean, I think that these two songs back to back are very blues and like more heavily blues inspired than the rest of the album, but it's not. Eddie doesn't lean into just doing, like, he doesn't go into full Eric Clapton mode and just play like, blues pentatonic scales or anything. I don't think he's capable of doing that. That'd be too boring for him.
Right.
But yeah, like I wouldn't say that there's anything that's just spot on. I mean, the next song is a cover, is a blues cover from like the 50s.
Well, Ice Cream Man, 3 minutes and 18 seconds. And as we mentioned on part one, it's the one of only 2 tracks, in addition to You Really Got Me, that was not written by anybody in the band. This is John Brim, who was an American Chicago blues guitarist, songwriter, and singer. And he did write and record Ice Cream Man, which is later covered, of course, by Van Halen. He was born in 1922 and lived to 2003. So he died an old man at age 81. So, and had a career through there. So I don't think I've ever been familiar with the blues version of this, but I'll tell you a quick story. I worked with a guy for years. Kind of the line that everybody had once you hang out with him for a bit is that he could play. But the joke was always, well, he knows the first 30 seconds of every song, right? He could just suddenly start playing. It's like a name that tune kind of thing. And there'd be 2 or 3 of us going, oh, I know that one. And then he'd just switch to the next thing and play 30 seconds of that. But he could play Ice Cream Man all the way through and knew all the lyrics. So every time I hear this song, I think about him. But, the lyrics are goofy, but because they're supposed to be and that kind of thing. So in that way, it fits Dave. I think you mentioned in part one, this shows his theatricality as well. But what's your, I know you said you like every song on this album. What's your thoughts on Ice Cream Man?
I love Ice Cream Man. I love how tongue-in-cheek it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely using double entendres the entire time. Very flirtatious undertones. The entire song is about an ice cream man just out here laying the wood on everybody's wives, pretty much. It is my second favorite Ice Cream Man song because I think if you've ever heard Tom Waits' version of Ice Cream Man, which is a complete original song, it's creepier. It has the same vibe. Both of the songs kind of approach the same subject, but they're vastly different. Whereas like David Lee Roth is a little more tongue in cheek, and Tom Waits makes you think of like Sweet Tooth riding around in an ice cream truck.
Right? Yeah.
But yeah, like I love this song. I think it's a lot of fun. I don't know. It just plays into the personality of David Lee Roth a lot. And apparently he plays guitar. This is the only time he gets credited with guitar on the album. I think the intro sounds really, really good. And then they just record the rest of it live. I was looking into this at the beginning before we went live on mic here, because I was like, there is no way that I've heard David Lee Roth play guitar. He's not that good. But apparently on this day when they recorded the song, he had it in him. Maybe he was practicing with Eddie for a while before they approached this, but it's I don't know. It's a very cheeky song.
It is. Apparently he had a drink or he didn't, and it affected him either way. I don't know. He's playing anyway.
Was it God, I'm trying to I was listening, this goes into wrestling, I guess, but there was someone he was like, yeah, I wouldn't wrestle him unless he had like 3 or 4 beers. Maybe it was Dick the Bruiser.
Oh my God.
Talking about maybe it's one of those things. He has to, that's like me in pool. If I have like 3 beers, I'm really good. And you drink beer number 4, and then I'm just absolute trash again. maybe it's one of those kind of things.
Right. Yeah. He had just the right amount to be able to play that guitar, but one more would have put him over the top.
I love the end with the exit of this song is really, really fun with they're kind of doing the call and repeat. So you have David Lee Roth hitting his notes and then them just being mimicked by Van Halen on guitar. It's real fun.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin used to do that a lot, the call and repeat stuff. So I always appreciate that as a guitar player. I think it's a lot of fun. Beatles do it as well, to some extent. The king of just doing melody lines, George Harrison, he would do a lot of call and repeat stuff. That's fun.
Yeah. The end of this song always reminded me of, gosh, I can't play. Well, just of a thousand different blues songs, but the very end always reminds me of the end of "Let's Go Crazy" by Prince because he has that blues breakdown at the end of that song.
Yeah.
As I said, as there's other thousand blues songs out there.
It would be fun to see what Prince would have done on some of these tracks now that you brought Prince up, because I feel like the guitar would be really good, but completely different than the approach that Eddie Van Halen
Oh
took.
man,
Even during the same time period, would have been very different.
man, I said earlier what I said about there's no one's done anything for the first time. Maybe I said that off mic. I can't remember now, but that everybody's kind of took something from somebody else to get where they are or whatever. Man, Prince did too, because they all did. But dude, Prince is, he's just such a freaking icon to me. I just can't. Anybody that tells me they're not into it, I'm like, I just don't know what you're talking about. The guy was a musical genius and could play anything and did, and just loved being on stage. Like for as shy as he could be in interviews and whatnot, dude on stage, he was a killer. Like he could just, man, such a presence, dude. Gone too soon. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the gimmick, though, with the shy interviews. I
Yeah.
don't buy it. I think it's part of the mystique of Prince, the genius of Prince. I love Prince,
Yeah.
so
God, so
I
good.
could talk about Prince for days. So we'll have to move on and save that for another another one of these. Maybe we'll break down. God, I think everyone's done Purple Rain. Maybe we'll do 1999 or something.
Yeah, dude, I'm here for it because I just, yeah, a true American original. Like, and just a, I think he inspired probably just as many artists that came after him as probably that inspired him that came before him. I don't know, but man,
Prince
gone
kind
way
of
too
gets a
soon.
lot of for a lot of his later stuff. He gets a lot of crap, but a lot of it's him pushing other artists forward. So him
Mhm.
finding someone that he thinks is a great vocalist and working with them, or constantly pushing himself to do something different. Like there's not a Prince album that really sounds alike once you get past
Fair.
1999. Like all of the stuff is different, whether it's going to be a straight R&B album or something more electronic. Like even if you think about like the Batman soundtrack, like the clips of him recording bass lines and stuff for that are insane. He's just like a different level musician. Similar to like Beck. Like Beck's always kind of pushing himself and doing different things and
Yeah.
recording most of the parts on the album. It's a total different approach when you're talking about someone that can play kind of anything. Like plays what like one time he famously Prince was asked in an interview, I think after his first album, they were like, "How many instruments do you play?" And then he just put up the number 2 and 7. He's like 27 different instruments.
Yeah, dude. Plus, there's so many legends about all these guys that have been floating around for years. I've always heard that Prince taught himself how to play everything growing up. He would lock himself in his room for days on end and just learn how to play. He would listen to the radio and find the notes and find what sounded right and just learn how to play everything. I'm like, come on, really? Like, he came out of the womb knowing how to do things. That's crazy, dude.
There's a great section in DMX's biography where he's talking about how Prince ruined his ability to get girls.
That's great.
He's like, being as dark as I am, and all the girls are looking for guys that look like Prince. It just did not work out for me. He's talking about himself in high school, and I don't know why it popped in my mind, but yeah, if for anyone out there that has never heard or listened to the Audible or read the DMX biography, it's worth it. Go check if you like DMX. That is one heck of a read.
Who reads it on Audible? Is it him reading it?
It is not him reading it, but they have someone that does a great vocal performance of what it would almost sound like if DMX was telling the story. It's unfortunate that DMX didn't do it. It would have made it great, but there is some. I will say that if you have like maybe some issues with your childhood, that some of the beginning chapters might be really hard because he did have a really tough life out in Yonkers.
Yeah. Another guy gone way too soon, by the way. Rest in peace, DMX and Prince. Yeah, dude, he's we've covered DMX here on the podcast, and I think he still holds records that haven't been broken. And I always forget the number, but I think he had his first, I want to say his first 5 albums all debuted at number 1. First time that any artist ever had that happen consecutively. And I'm like, he was in demand. Like, dude, he was red hot in his time. Like, people absolutely could not get enough of this guy. It's crazy. And
First rapper to ever headline a music festival.
yep,
Woodstock '99.
yep, man, what a performance, by the way, dude.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's great. I saw DMX live before he passed away. I did luckily get to see him when he came through the Tabernacle here in Atlanta, and it was still that level of energy in his performance. So I'm very thankful that I was able to get to see that live performance. And it makes you like really like after that, because I miss Prince when he came through and he died like so I've any artist that's like on my list now that I'm like, oh man, I need to see them. I've been trying to go as much as possible, just in case something like that happens. Because there's like Prince, I never got to see. Tom Petty, I never got to see. So it's like you always put stuff like that off. I will say, if you have the money to do that, right, it's someone you love, just go do it because you won't regret it. I didn't regret seeing the DMX show for sure. I think the tickets were pretty expensive, but it was well worth it. So I've been kind of living by that lately. But yeah, it was great. It was great getting to see him. Unfortunately, I never got to see Prince though. Have you ever seen Prince live?
I never did. No, I regret it. Yeah, I heavily regret it. He, yeah, I mean, I sometimes I'll look up because I've never seen a Beatle live either, but to see McCartney at any given time, no matter what year it is, you're going to mortgage your house. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. Doesn't even matter what space you are. Your nosebleed section by the, where the rafter construction begins at the ceiling, and it's $1,000 or something. I'm like, come on, man.
I got really lucky with Paul McCartney. I saw him at Piedmont Park. It was $80.
What?
A ticket. Me and my wife went. We weren't even married at that time, so this would have been 2009, 2010. And it was an incredible show. So it's one of those things that is worth seeing. He actually covers songs that you wouldn't expect him to cover. Like he'll do 2 or 3 John songs and then tell stories, which was really nice. Fun. And the band is like kind of spot on as well. And he goes throughout the Beatles catalog all the way through, McCartney solo catalog. And he even sprinkles in some Traveling Wilburys when I saw him. Absolutely a phenomenal show. So if you ever get a chance, and you don't have to mortgage your house,
right?
Luckily, Piedmont Park is so huge; it's like he did a festival all unto himself. So the tickets were like $80 general admission for. So
oh wow!
If you can ever find something that lines up like that requires a little bit of driving, it might be worth it.
Right. Yeah, something to think about. He, I haven't seen very many mega bands or artists in my time, just a very, very small handful for multiple reasons. But, we got one track left here on Van Halen, and I'm going to be honest with you. On Fire at 3 minutes even. Dude, I am not crazy about this. I don't know what's going on. It kind of sounds like at some point they said, hey, let's just do something that doesn't sound anything else like any of the rest of this. And let's make sure the chorus is like hypersonic where dogs can hear it. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too hard on it, but I've never been crazy about this track, man.
This track is all about the guitar, honestly.
That's fair.
It in the drums specifically, because the rhythm drum part in this is insane. But yeah, this is all about the guitar. Like there's tons of tapping in this. You get some really big lead guitar moments, and the entire riff is just blazing across. So this is very much the, how like Rush is a musician's band.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. This is the song that's more for the musicians than the general listening audience, I think.
That's a great way to put it. If you remove the vocals from this, I could probably listen to this a lot easier than I can with the vocals.
But even with the vocals, he's showing off how much range he has.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's even like the musician thing, I think, more than anything else. I would say it foreshadows a lot of more of like heavier metal coming in the 80s. So there's that they could be say about it. This is also one of my least favorite tracks on the album, but
Mhm.
there's appreciation there. I get what they were trying to do.
Well, I like when you said foreshadowing because it does kind of suggest at some point you're like, man, are they again? If you could imagine buying this album in 1978 as a teenager or whatever, are you thinking, man, what's the second album going to sound like? Because the last track kind of leads you to believe they're going to maybe do something heavier. I don't know.
Yeah, and after listening to this, when you hit the last track, you're just disappointed because there's not more. Because
Right? Yeah.
it's such a short album. I think the run length of this is like what 39, 40 minutes.
It's not very 35 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Crazy.
you're blazing through this album. This is also why it's just such a great album because, like I said, like you have a like a 45-minute car ride, or like you want to go to the gym, get on the treadmill. This is the perfect album for that.
Mhm.
And the energy's there. It's great. I love it. To me, it's probably in my top 10 favorite albums of all time to just put
Mm.
on and listen to, because it's just there's no bad tracks. That's what I look for when I think about favorite albums. Like, I don't want to have to skip anything. I just want to be able to
Mm.
listen to it unabashedly, and then like I don't want to have to skip around. I don't want to have to say, I hate that track or whatever. The rest of the album can be good, but if it has a song I hate on it, then it can't be in the top 10.
Ah, interesting. Yeah.
So this album kind of hits all the marks. I don't know where I would have to sit down and think about where I would put each of those albums, but it's definitely in my top 10 favorite albums. And as far as debut albums go, I think it's definitely stood on its own over the years, both in its influence, in just like going back and listening to it again. It just, the way they decided to record it, I think makes all the difference too, with tracking most of the stuff live, because it doesn't feel like an album from that time period.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, there again, but they, by releasing this album, they established themselves as something brand new to the table, and then establish who they are moving forward. So it's absolutely safe to call this a statement album, isn't it? With it being their debut.
Yeah, I would think so. Uh, Easily submitted theirself in rock and roll history and future Hall of Famers with this album. And the best thing is they didn't have the sophomore or the sophomore slump that everyone else seems to have when you put out a great album like this as a debut.
Yeah, they followed up nicely. Well, look, I know you said that after the first three that you weren't really on board. So, I mean, I personally think this album's missing a ballad. No. But, again, for a freshman effort, man, just to come out swinging hardcore. Like, I just feel like things were going to look up from here, and they did for a long time till they didn't. But the history of this band overall, man, and then we try not to make this too much a band introspective, but it's hard to not do that when it's a debut album, of course. But the overall history of this band is puzzling at any given time. Not sure what in the world has happened. And of course, we unfortunately lose Eddie. I mean, by the way, as we're finishing this up, do you foresee a time when we see any sort of assembly of these guys on a stage somewhere where it's Wolfgang and it's Michael? I don't know if those two guys even get along, and maybe Alex is on drums. Do you think it's just over? We should all just move on? Because I've not heard or read anything like that.
I mean, is Rock and Roll Hall? Are they in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I guess so. Yeah, they are. Okay, I was gonna say, but I think they're the kind of the perfect band to do something like that, simply because of how many people Eddie Van Halen inspired. So you can have a rotation of great guitar players come in and play Van Halen, but do it in their style that they took forward. So your Paul Gilberts, your Steve Vais, your John Petrucci's, your Zach Wilds of the world can all come in and play like what inspired them and their style of guitar on an Eddie Van Halen track. And then you also have Wolfgang, who's out there doing his own thing as well. So I think it is a band that kind of lends itself to that. And then you always have, DLR and Sammy Hagar, if they can get along long enough. I think there's something fun there. If they ever wanted to do it, this would be a band that might be worth seeing with them doing that, depending on the guitar players they pick, and etc.
Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, I don't know what the future holds here for this, if there even is a future, but I guess we'll see.
I wouldn't expect an album, but
no,
if they wanted to do some festival shows or something, like the one that comes to mind that I think that they would be perfect for them to do, that Wolfgang already does each year, is the Guitar Wars. Where it's just virtuoso guitar players. Like if they wanted to do a Van Halen reunion there of some ilk, right? Like, cause it's not really Van Halen without Eddie, but you have his son, you have so many guitar players that he inspired that would all be in the same vicinity. Cause Guitar Wars kind of brings all the big guns out. But yeah, like, to me, if you had to put, like, if they were like, we're going to do an album, we got Alex, we got Michael on board. DLR says he's going to sing. If I had to pick a guitar player to fill in for them, it'd be Paul Gilbert. I think that would be the guy. Just because he won't be too flashy. He will kind of stick to what you would want out of Van Halen while putting his own little interesting touches on it. As a guitar player, that would be my choice. But Paul Gilbert's one of my favorite guitar players of all time, so that's kind of I will send you some Beatles Paul Gilbert. He has a cover band that they do that has some very interesting other musicians in it that I think you'll get a kick out of. They do a really good job of some Beatles albums that I think you'll get
That's
a kick
cool.
out of.
That works. Well, kids, there you have it. There is our review of Van Halen 1, and it didn't take long. I mean, it's been out for 30 something. Look, we get to things when we can. That's the great part about this here little podcast, folks, is that there's time until there's not any time. And until they drop the bomb, which they may do, things are good. 2025 is going to be an interesting year, kids. I don't know what to tell you. So we'll see if the show makes it to next year, if any of us make it to next year. So fingers crossed. But in the meantime, we got a little bit of time to talk about stuff. So I'm glad we got this one done, and thoroughly enjoyed it, and we'll have more to come. I'm sure at some point mentioning Van Halen, or at least talking about Eddie, and possibly dive into another album at some point, but we shall see. But Chris, in the meantime, before we finish this one out, give me your last word on Van Halen 1.
10 out of 10. It's a wonderful album. If you've listened to this show all the way through and have never heard the album, I would be very surprised, but definitely go and check it out if not. And if you have heard it before, give it a listen. And don't just like put it on your car, like sit down at your computer, put some headphones on, some nice headphones. Just really give it a listen. A lot of the soundscaping and things they do, like I talked about with the sound isolation boosts and the fact that the guitar bleeds into the bass tracks. The bass track bleeds into the guitar tracks, and you get the bounce. You'll hear Eddie's guitar on the right side, and then it'll bounce to the left side. There's a lot of other details on this album, and every time you listen to it, you'll kind of hear something new that'll make you smile if you're a musician. It's wonderful. And Tom, as far as a follow-up, I think we should go to the first hair metal album following up Spinal Tap, which would be Too Fast for Love by Motley Crue. That's what I consider the first hair metal album. And I don't, if this album doesn't happen, I think the next 10 years of music looks a lot different.
Yeah, again, I'm not a big Crue guy, so
yeah, but
not a big Crue guy.
I would say this album comes out, you get Too Fast for Love, you get Mental Health by Quiet Riot, and then you get Ozzy. And Randy Rhoads lines up with Van Halen in a different way, but they tackle a lot of the same subjects with their classical, neoclassical guitar styles.
Yeah.
Tapping and the different things. There is a famous guitar player or Guitar World interview with Randy Rhoads talking about how he hated Eddie Van Halen for a while. in the sense of like he was teaching guitar at the time and people would just want to learn tapping with no thought of like how you would fit it into something. So just
Right.
learning sections of things. So maybe that would be the next one to talk about. Another legend who died way too soon. Plane crash. So that there, I think there's a lot of places for us to go to, but the biggest thing that you could say about this album is it sparked the next 10 years of music. One of the greatest debut albums of all time, and still one of my favorite things to listen to.
Yeah, and I gotta be honest with you, kids. I think it holds up. I don't, you could say it's dated. You could listen. People could use the word dated for anything they want to, but I think some of that is not subjective. That is personal bias. So maybe if you've heard a smattering of 80s music, if you didn't grow up in that time, you would say it sounds like it's. I just don't know that I agree with that. I think a lot of this holds up. 80s guitar will always hold up. And, like we said, like Chris said, man, solid band, great first album. And I don't think it's overstating at all the idea of that this directly influenced the next 10 years of music, because it absolutely did, because it would not have been the same genre. And, kids, oftentimes we'll talk about genre defining moments, artists, writers, actors, wrestlers, musicians, movies, that kind of thing. So we do a lot of that here on the show, along with personal favorites. And this just so happens to check off all those, a couple of those different boxes and then some. But stay tuned for more, kids. We're never done talking about music. It's one of the M's, actually. It's actually the first M in the 6M. So we're never going to be done talking about it, along with various other things. So keep your eyes open for new content. We appreciate you as always. Share this wherever you can and be on the lookout for more to come. But for now, that is Van Halen 1. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.